Hello and welcome to the RotoWire WNBA show, where we talk about fantasy basketball. I'm Jason Shebilske, and I'm joined today by a very special guest, ESPN's Liz Loza. Liz, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you for having me, Jason. I'm very excited. This is my first WNBA podcast. I've gone on ESPN Bet Live and talked props, and this is my second season doing a regular column, but this is my very first podcast. So thank you for having me, and please be patient with me.
Yeah, absolutely. We're glad to have you. We have a lot of news to analyze while you're here, including several unfortunate injuries to significant players such as Cameron Brink and Maddy Siegrist. We'll talk about some players that you can pick up in light of those injuries. And finally, we'll use Liz's expertise for a version of her signature facts versus feelings for the second half of the season. If you have questions for us throughout the show, feel free to ask them in the comments. If they're asked live, we'll answer them during the show, but we'll also reply in the comments if there are questions asked afterward. Those looking to test RotoWire's full offering of tools can visit rotowire.com/try for a free trial. And please consider liking and subscribing wherever you're watching. Liz, you're joining us at a particularly newsworthy time, and while I wish that there was more positive news, I'm excited to get your insight on what things might look like around the league as the injury bug is in full swing. Let's start with the most significant injury of the bunch, as Cameron Brink tore her ACL on Tuesday and will miss the rest of the season. The Sparks have already been adjusting their rotation quite a bit recently, so who are some players that you think will see the biggest fantasy boost while Brink is sidelined?
Well, I will say that as soon as so let me first actually say that I have been a fan of the WNBA, a new fan, not like a Caitlin Clark fan, but like a fan of the W, but a recent fan of the W. I got into it because, frankly, when Candace Parker went home to Chicago, which is where I'm from. I think you too. I think you might actually live there. Yep. But I'm from Chicago. So when she went home and won the ship for the Sky, that was sort of when I locked in and was like, oh, this is, so a late adopter compared to the length of the league. But, I was really interested and then decided I live in Los Angeles. I wanted to take my kids to the Sparks game. We had NECA. Obviously now it's in Seattle, but we had NECA and it was it's a fun atmosphere. I also want to say to anybody who's listening, go to a live WNBA game, especially if you have kids. It is one of the best family outings that you can do. It is affordable. It is safe. The vibe is glorious and immaculate. The product is fantastic. My son, who is 10, is a giant LA Sparks fan. In fact, to camp today, he wore his LA Sparks little t-shirt because it was wear sports gear to camp day. Nice. So, I just wanted to say, so when you talk about Brink, I have more affection for her because of the city I live in and because of the coast that she hails from. So when I saw the news, I was like, oh no, even though I hadn't drafted her on my personal fantasy squad, this is my second year playing fantasy, by the way. I was like, gotta go to the waiver wire. And I found Leonie, who I immediately picked up before when the minute I got the alert that said that Caitlin had to be assisted off of the court, or Cameron, had to be assisted off of the court, I went to the waiver wire and picked up Leonie. She is rostered in under 8% of ESPN fantasy leagues right now. She's coming off of a season high 28 minutes on the 18th, which was the game at Connecticut. She managed 11 points in that game. Her third double-digit points outing of the year. And for what it's worth, she also recorded 7 boards in 2 of her last 4. So she is presenting with two-way appeal.
Yeah, I agree. I did the same thing as you when the Brink news dropped. I picked her up because, especially in leagues with daily moves, it's if a move doesn't work out, you can just stream someone and move on. So
that is the toughest thing. Obviously coming from the football world, though, the daily cadence of fantasy basketball is that which I have had the most trouble getting used to, having to constantly check in.
Yeah, and especially with so lineups don't lock at the first game start, but then waivers lock for the day when the first game starts. So as soon as that first game of the day starts, you can start picking up players for the following day, and it's just kind of a lot of moving pieces.
I'm not good at that part. I'm going to be honest. I'm not a waiver wire hound in that way. But also, it's a smaller league. So, at a certain point, you're talking about the same people over and over again.
Right. I was better at it in previous years, but as life gets busier in future years, it's hard to keep up sometimes. The Wings also got some unfortunate news since Maddy Siegrist will be sidelined indefinitely with broken finger. However, they finally had an encouraging update as Natasha Howard was cleared to return to action Thursday against the Sky, while Arike Ogunbowale missed just one game due to her Achilles injury and was also back against the Sky. Howard came off the bench in her return to court and played 20 minutes. From a fantasy standpoint, do you think her return offsets Siegrist's absence, or are there other players that you're looking at in Dallas?
I mean, Jason, this is Natasha Howard, right? She's a 3-time WNBA champion, a 2-time All-Star. Yeah, she's 32 years old, but she averaged a career-high 33 minutes per game last year. She only missed one game, so don't come at me with the durability age argument either. And that was thought to be like a crowded Dallas team, and she still managed to, like, as a vet, over 30, carve out a real sizable piece of that pie for herself. The foot, to me, didn't seem like it was an issue on Thursday. She only attempted 7 field goals, but she also collected 3 boards and registered 4 assists in those 20 minutes. I don't know. We're adding minutes. The production is going to go up. I feel like Coach Trammell is going to be smart about easing Howard back in, but she is a bona fide starter. And the Wings, I think this is a part of fantasy that people don't talk about a lot. Like, the Wings are in last place in the Western Conference. They have a 3-11 record. This is a team that needs to make up ground, and relying on someone as consistent and proven as Howard can help them accomplish that.
Right. And especially in the WNBA, every team is in it every given week. So you can still, like, the Wings are still in playoff contention. If they can get Sabally back, especially down the line, get Jaylen Brown back, I think that they could be a really good team. And they don't have an incentive to tank this year because they have the pick swap with Chicago next year.
It's a great point.
They get the better pick of those anyway. So one player who had been encouraging is Monique Billings, another front court option for the Wings. Do you think that she'll be able to maintain a prominent role even with Howard back in action?
I am reluctant to throw any shade at any player because the W's fan base is so fantastically fervent. But Billings, was a bench player, right, for 6 years in Atlanta, and then was waived by the Sparks before signing a hardship contract with the Wings after, and that's a key part, Howard hurt her foot, So while Billings has managed to produce in a variety of ways, she's obviously been great off the glass, and she also cleared 35 fantasy points in 5 games since finding her way into the starting lineup. But those efforts, again, haven't been reflected in the team's record. So I think as Howard plays more minutes, Billings will naturally see the court for fewer, probably closer to 20, 25 instead of 30, 35. And she will be a real life boon to this team because they, especially given all the injuries, understand the importance of depth.
Yeah, I agree. The Wings have a lot of depth, and they're a reason why at the beginning of the year, we did our playoff rankings. I had them as a playoff team because it felt like they were just too talented to not make the playoffs. And it seems like they can't catch a break with injuries, but now they seem to be on the upswing, which is good.
Pendulum.
Yeah, absolutely. Ending the segment on another encouraging note, Chelsea Gray made her season debut Wednesday. Although she came off the bench, it seems likely that her role will grow as soon as she regains her conditioning. Now that she's back, are you holding Tiffany Hayes or Kate Martin, or just letting them both go to the waiver wire?
First of all, you love to see it. I watched that game with my kids. Adam, this is the beauty of living on the West Coast, so that you can see things with your kids or before it's too late. So I also had bet the over on the point total, and it hit. So it was a good game. It was a good game for me personally. It was a good game for Chelsea Gray. It was also, maybe I'm going to say, a great game, even though not necessarily in terms of stats, for Kate Martin, because they did an incredible highlight piece of her in the during halftime on the broadcast, and I think it's actually relevant to this point. I'm going to start with Martin, and to answer your question, I have her on my fantasy team. I'm not getting rid of her just yet The Aces, as we all know, are a super team, even if they're not dominating the way they did last year right now. They also play super fast. I believe they lead the league in pace, in fact, and that's obviously nice for fantasy. So while Martin has only recorded one start all season, I think Buckingham likes her. Again, that piece to me exemplified and illustrated that she has a real place on this team and a real future with this team, and she's gelling with this team. And as we just discussed with the Wings, depth is so important. So I'm going to hold on to her, but as a stash capacity.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. They've been really trying to incorporate Martin, it seems, as a rookie. So it's good to see that happen where they haven't really had to do that in recent years. So it's good to see the Aces kind of being able to pivot and show that versatility.
I do think we have to talk a little. I mean, I like that you mentioned Hayes because that's like the other end of the spectrum, at least in terms of experience, obviously. I actually highlighted her. I write a weekly risers and fallers column that comes out every Tuesday, and I highlighted her in a piece a couple of weeks ago. She was rising then, but now she's falling. She was actually dropped in close to 7% of the ESPN leagues that had rostered her. So now both she and Martin, I think this is interesting, are rostered in like 10/11% of ESPN leagues. She's averaged more minutes per game, 23, than Martin, who's averaged 18. And she's outproduced Martin, as a vet should, in nearly every category. But her shooting was rusty, I thought, to start with. Like, that's kind of what happens when you come out of retirement, you know? But right? Like, it's not too surprising. But she was contributing in secondary categories. Here's the thing, though. And maybe I'm being swayed by the rookie hype. And again, that piece at halftime really got me. I don't think that Hayes ultimately has the same kind of upside that Martin has. And so if I'm looking at a stream or a stash, I want to lean on the upside player. And that is why I am more willing to let Hayes go.
Yeah, that makes sense. It feels like we're maybe seeing more of Hayes's full potential with this current iteration of the team, whereas Martin's role still feels like it could grow down the road. Yeah. We'll also get to see our first glimpse of the Aces at basically full strength in the post-Candace Parker era. If Kiah Stokes retains a starting role while Alysha Clark heads to the bench, do you think either or both of them are still worth rostering?
I'm going to take Clark over Stokes. AC has been more productive regardless of her starting status. She's also been efficient. She's managed a field goal percentage above 52%, which ranks her inside the top 20 players in terms of efficiency. Even better, and I love this, she has been solid from beyond the arc, recording a top 10 3-point percentage of nearly 45%. So maybe the minutes dip, but she's not being erased from the squad. And again, I think because this team is so fantastic, it is one that you want to invest in.
Yeah, absolutely. So a viewer question from us. I think this is Kieran, my usual co-host, but are you worried about the Aces kind of more from a sports betting standpoint, I guess, but or do you think that Gray's return rights the ship?
Well, I think it's going to take a minute. I also think like the Olympic break is a wrinkle that we just have to kind of live through and monitor. I mean, are you watching A'ja Wilson? Like, it is really hard to bet against this team making things happen. Their record is not as good. Maybe, you know, Chelsea Gray is a little bit rusty. I think like I said, the Olympic break maybe causes either rust or rest. Like, it could go either way, you know? But ultimately, I'm not worried because this team has proven in back-to-back seasons that they're doing great. If anything, and again, like, this is my favorite stat, the pace stat to me, like when you're looking at over under and betting lines, I almost always want to take the over for the Aces because there are just so many shots taken and it's a pretty efficient squad that they can beat most lines.
Yeah, they're so good at controlling the game that it feels like teams have to keep up with them. Thanks so much for that question. We have just a few more before we move on. So do we have any Brittney Sykes update? This is from Luke Rolke. She played so well after coming back from the ankle. So about a week ago, the Mystics said that she would be reevaluated in 2 weeks. Going along with that, that was so probably at least out another week, but it wouldn't surprise me if even if she is able to return before the Olympic break, maybe they limit her a little bit just to manage her workload. Yeah. Then any Aaliyah Edwards update? We haven't heard much from her since she had some late game back tightness. As for right now, she's day to day. I don't know, especially with Shakira Austin still out, that
Yeah.
the Mystics front court is really super fantasy relevant, unfortunately, at this point. But when Aaliyah Edwards is back, she was really productive in her increased role. So hopefully she's back in action sooner rather than later.
I also just want to say, like, as far as the Mystics are concerned, this is I'm gonna tell on myself here. Had really high hopes for Samuelson to like emerge as a really solid perimeter shooter, and I feel like she has completely underwhelmed, especially with so many opportunities. She had so many opportunities with the team suffering so many injuries to like really step up, and I have been surprised, frankly, at how mid her play has been.
Yeah, and even with Samuelson struggling, it feels like the Mystics have been in most of the games that they've played. They've just lost by a few points every time. So if a few games go the other way, like they're still maybe in playoff contention, but it's just been an unfortunate start to the season, and especially after Elena Deladon stepped away,
Yeah.
it's been interesting to see them rebuild. So if you enjoy content like this, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel. With so many players sustaining injuries recently, we should have a chance to see the wide range of talent in the WNBA. We talked about Lee Ueru earlier in the show, but who are some other players in Los Angeles who you think could step up in Cameron Brink's absence?
Well, I like Aari McDonald. She's rostered in just over 25% of ESPN fantasy leagues. It's interesting because she began the season fighting for playing time amidst this crowded backcourt, obviously rebuilding with Nneka's departure. She was recording fewer than 20 minutes in each of her first games this season, but lately she's been like thriving off the bench. She's averaging close to 28 minutes per game over her last 5 games. So it's a nice increase. And that increase in minutes has correlated to Layshia Clarendon's dip in playing time. Not surprisingly, McDonald recorded her first start this past Tuesday in Connecticut while Clarendon rode the bench. And in that game, McDonald registered her fifth consecutive double-digit point effort and her third game in a row of exactly 14 points. So I like that because now that gives us an idea for projections, right? 14 points, 3 weeks in a row, and an increase in minutes. Okay, now we know what we're working with here. She also ranks 29th in total fantasy points over that time, her last 5 games. So I'm going to bet that this is more of a pattern than a trend.
Yeah, so that leads us well into our next question from Nacho's Gone. Do you consider McDonald more as a keeper, like as a player to keep on your roster throughout the season, or more as a streamer?
I think at this point, I would lean towards keeper because, Clarendon has been off and on last year as well. And the durability issues are there with them. So I think I am leaning towards, especially with this team finding themselves in a totally new era, McDonald being more of a keeper. Yeah. Would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that she's just too consistent to let go to the waiver wire. It feels like if she's on waivers, she's probably getting picked up as soon as her waiver period expires. So I think that she's someone worth keeping on your roster. Thanks so much for that question. I was also really impressed by Stefanie Talbot's performance Thursday against the Liberty, as she tallied 9 points, 11 rebounds, and an assist in 31 minutes off the bench. Do you think this had more to do with Ueru's foul trouble, or is Talbot someone you think could have fantasy relevance?
I don't know. I know you mentioned this in the outline, and I went back and took a look. You love to see the 11 boards, but I still think that Ueru is the way to go here, and there's just not enough. Talbot is only rostered in like 2% of ESPN fantasy leagues. So if the trend continues, you're probably going to be okay scooping her up, but this isn't someone that I'm going to jump on. It feels anomalistic, but I don't have like proof to say that it is.
Right, because we have like like they aren't rostered in many leagues, it feels like both of them are probably available wherever you're looking.
Right.
If you're in a really like sharp league and Ueru's maybe snapped up and you need someone off like to come off the bench, Talbot is a consideration, but I think I agree with you that I still prefer Ueru in this case. So heading cross country to New York, the Liberty remain without Courtney Vandersloot, who has been sidelined due to a personal matter, the passing of her mother. So I hope that she is able to return to action soon after having a grieving process. But Kayla Thornton and Leonie Fiebich have stepped up in her absence, with Thornton serving as a starter. Thornton is 8.2% rostered, while Fiebich is 3.2% rostered. If you have only one roster spot available that you want to give up, do you have a preference between these two players?
It's so interesting. Again, like the dichotomy between these two players, like they're on opposite ends of the spectrum, grizzled vet or international rookie. Based on Thursday's game, I'm going to take the rookie, even though Thornton played more minutes and was the more efficient shooter. Fiebich led the team in rebounds. She added 5 dimes and she sunk a triple, which is something that Thornton did not do. Well, I mean, she wasn't as efficient from the 3-point line. I don't actually think I think she attempted 2 3-point shots and didn't sink either of them from what I recall. Maybe that was an outlier of a performance, but I'll lean towards flash instead of floor when I'm considering depth, and especially with Benijah Laney-Hamilton also dealing with that knee issue. I think it helps out Fiebich more.
Yeah, absolutely. So Rebecca Allen has been inconsistent this season, but had one of her best performances of the season Tuesday against the Liberty, putting up 17 points, 7 rebounds, and an assist in 33 minutes. She's rostered in just 36.9% of leagues. If she's available in a league you're in, is she someone that you're prioritizing?
Well, Jason, I have her rostered on my team, and I'm in second to last place, so that should be enough. I mean, to be fair, I had Diamond Miller and Enrique, so thank goodness the Achilles wasn't anything serious, but it definitely messed me up for a week and I could not catch up. Times have been tough is what I'm saying, but I did have some hope for Allen, especially honestly with Sophie Cunningham underwhelming too. She was on my fallers list 2 weeks ago. Copper has just been fire, and I don't think Allen has never really been a huge producer. She's never averaged double-digit points over the entirety of her 8-year career. Her value for fantasy has been her defensive play or her long-distance shooting, and that's just tough to rely on a game-to-game basis. I don't think she'll sustain the same sort of offensive momentum that she did Saturday at Minnesota. I don't think she's going to maintain that offensive momentum this coming Saturday at Minnesota. The Lynx are a really solid defensive unit. They rank second in defensive rating. Allen only had 9 points when she played them a few games ago. So if you're starting her, you're probably in trouble like me.
Yeah. She feels like one of those players that's more valuable in real life than in fantasy. Everywhere you look in WNBA coverage, people rave about Rebecca Allen and what a great presence she is on the team. But for fantasy purposes, it's just a little bit inconsistent. Is she someone, because you do have her rostered, I'll put you on the spot a little bit, is she someone that you're considering dropping if there is a more productive option out there, or just kind of wait and see?
I don't know who that more productive option would be, right? I mean, that's of the players avail. I'm trying to think, but I have her. Carrington would be someone that I would want to scoop, but she's also I believe rostered in a similar number of leagues, and so it's hard to find someone who's rostered in 45% of leagues.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. I feel like someone like Aari McDonald could maybe be worth looking at, but even then you don't know whether McDonald will be able to sustain her production over the course of the season, where it feels
it becomes matchup dependent then.
Right.
I think is what you're looking at. Rostering is one thing. Starting, I have not necessarily started Allen very much. I had to this week because of the injuries I mentioned, but that I knew I was taking an L.
Yeah. So we have another viewer question from Jack Blake. What's the latest on Rhyne Howard's injury? So we haven't had a lot of information coming out of Atlanta about this. They're keeping it pretty close to the vest, calling it just a lower leg injury. But we did have a reporter on the ground today, I believe from Atlanta, who, not us, but a TV station, she
Mhm.
noticed Rhyne Howard on a knee scooter with her ankle wrapped.
Oh,
Yeah,
that's
so
not good.
yeah, it could just be they're keeping it precautionary, but it wouldn't be surprising for me to see her with a multi-game absence. And that leads us well into our next question of if Rhyne Howard misses significant time, who are some players who you think could step up for Atlanta?
Well, I would love for Cheyenne Parker-Tyus, who's 90% rostered. Also, I have her. um, like, at least from a scoring perspective, I would love to see her come to life. She's been solid against the glass. She's had at least 6 boards in 3 straight. But man, when you're rostered in 90% of leagues, like, this is the sort of moment that you're hoping, like, maybe the production increases. But since she's rostered in 90% of leagues, I don't think that's who you're asking for as a replacement. You're probably talking about Haley Jones, Crystal Dangerfield, Notts Hamilton. They're all rostered in only like 3-ish% of fantasy leagues. So my money of those 3 options who are widely available is on Jones working her way up the depth chart. She's carved out a starting role for herself this year after managing, and this is impressive to me, just 6 starts in all of 2023. She's also recorded double-digit points in 2 of her last 3 games, which included the last time she faced the Fever on June 13th, and she managed at least 3 rebounds and 2 assists for 3 straight games. It would be great if she could clean up the turnovers, but beggars can't be choosers. I think she's probably the next player up and certainly worthy of streaming consideration.
Yeah, and she was really productive in college, so it's good to see her uh, like maybe get an opportunity. Obviously, the circumstances surrounding it are unfortunate, but I think that if she can get enough minutes, she has the potential to at least have that fantasy upside for us, even if there are some inconsistent performances as we go along. So, are there any players that we didn't talk about from circumstances who you think are worth mentioning as worth adding?
I mean, I think everybody's been talking about her for a while, but Chennedy Carter has been on a tear, right? She headlined my Risers Fallers piece this week. She earned herself a starting role. Forget all the other noise. Um, that to me is impressive. Like, earning yourself a starting role, especially in a team with a giant spotlight on it for numerous reasons, is impressive. To stay focused like that. She posted another 18 points and was 100% from the charity stripe in the Sky's win over Dallas yesterday. She's still available in over 50% of ESPN fantasy leagues. And I also want to shout out, we talked about the Mystics a little bit earlier and how they're discombobulated, maybe is a good word to describe them. But Stefanie Dolson, the center there, she's also available in over 50% of ESPN fantasy leagues, and she has been awesome from downtown. She's sunk 4 of 7, twice as many as Caitlin Clark, by the way, at Indiana on Wednesday. So I think she, is a player that is a nice surprise, a pleasant surprise on a team that is otherwise a bit messy.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that both of those teams have kind of struggled as far as the record goes, but they definitely still have a lot of talent that it makes them worth watching and makes them worth fantasy consideration as well. So moving on to our final segment, we're going to dive into a little bit of your facts versus feelings segment. So Kieran and I talked Monday about the different strategies for fantasy managers based on where you are in the standings at this point. And I just wanted to get some of your insight. So, are you approaching things differently if you're at the top of the standings versus maybe toward the bottom fighting for a playoff spot?
I don't know, Jason. Why don't you tell me? I feel like one of those is what I'm living. Again, this is only my second year playing WNBA fantasy. I'm still mastering it. I can analyze all the players, but when it comes to my own lineup, I will fully admit I don't mind. I think that's also part of like being a quote analyst is like admitting the mistakes you make. Mistakes are also, world, hear this. Mistakes are fine to make as long as you learn from them. And learning who to start, because I've got a lot of I have an incredible bench and I struggle I'm not going to say every day because let's be honest, I don't change it every day, but every so many days with who to like bop in, especially in that utility space. So I would say that in general, in fantasy, I would like to, if I am in the bottom, as I am, chase upside constantly, which is evidenced in all of the players that, you asked me about, vets or rookies. Like, I think that when you are chasing, you have to chase the ceiling, because otherwise, if you're chasing floor, you're probably going to stay there, and nobody wants to, like, I don't care which fantasy sport it is. I would rather finish dead last than like in the middle, because at least I tried and had a good time along the way.
Yeah. And something that Kieran and I talked about on Monday was that it's nice to be able to make the playoffs and be like, oh yeah, I'm there. I think that it's good to make those like home run swing moves, because if they hit, great. I think you're in contention for a championship. And if they don't, like, you maybe wouldn't have been in the championship contention anyway. So especially if you're toward the bottom, you're just chasing that upside and hoping that something can stick down the stretch.
It's also more exciting. And then if it doesn't, you can just sit back with a nice glass of rosé or Chardonnay and enjoy the game and not be so stressed.
Exactly.
Or you can turn to sports betting.
Right. Regardless of what happens, it's always fun to watch the WNBA any given night. So the standard trade deadline in ESPN leagues seems to be July 5th. So there will be about 2 weeks of regular season games afterward, including the Olympic break. So it'll be about a month total. But I looked at each team's schedule after the Olympics, and the Dream, Sky, Sun, Aces, and Sparks play 16 games. The rest play 15, except for the Fever, who have had like a front-loaded schedule and play 14. So because ESPN leagues have these daily roster moves, is this slight difference in games enough to try trading away some players from the Fever, or are you approaching them basically the same way as others?
Friend, you are so sneaky. I mean, it did not occur to me to like start counting games like this. Sure, great. I don't know. I can tell you, Jason, we are in the league together, aren't we? You're going to beat me every time. You're going to beat me every single time. I'm never going to look ahead like this. This is why Jason hosts the show. I am just a humble guest. And yes, do what he said. I don't know.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it is a marginal difference, but especially when it comes to playoff time, every game counts. So I don't know, just something to keep in mind.
I mean, that nugget, I don't know. Who's your boss? What's his name?
Pete Schenke.
Pete. Oh, Pete. My good friend Pete, Wisconsin Pete. Pete, do never fire this man. Give this man a raise. He is doing the work, WERK. And now I know that I can't offer him any players because we're in the same league. I can't offer him any Fever players because I know what he's up to.
Right. Well, thank you. That's very kind. As we near the halfway point of the WNBA season, who are some players whose performances you think haven't been talked about enough?
Kahleah Copper, who I mentioned earlier. We've talked about streaming options and players owned in like under 10% of leagues. But my gosh, has Copper been a revelation on her first year with the Mercury. She is setting career highs in so many categories, 23.5 points per game. I mean, and she spent the bulk of her career in another place. And now there was so much debate as to whether or not she could even like carve out a reasonable role. And I think in fantasy points per game, she's top 5, right? Something like that, certainly top 10. So I just want to give a shout out to you. It's going to be very difficult to acquire her services in your league. No one is giving her up, but I think sometimes on shows like this, we don't give credit to the heralded players and to the investor who took a shot and said, that's great value. So Copper to me is an absolute star this season.
Yeah, it's tough to stand out in a backcourt that includes Diana Taurasi, one of the WNBA GOATs, but it's great to see Copper doing it. And Natasha Cloud, too. She's been able to hold her own. So Phoenix is humming on all cylinders, and hopefully they can keep things going.
Yeah.
Well, Liz, thanks so much for joining us today. Do you have any fantasy projects coming up that you're especially looking forward to? And where can viewers find your work?
I have so many fantasy projects. So For WNBA content, like I said earlier, I write a weekly risers and fallers column. Sometimes I add a best bet. This week it was the Aces Seattle, the Aces Storm game, and the over on that. So check that out. I also will periodically go on ESPN Bet Live to talk various WNBA props and bets. So, always watch ESPN Bet Live to get a fix. And then football is gearing up. It is the middle of June. It is almost the end of June, actually. Summer's officially here as of the solstice on the 20th, which means football season and fantasy football season is ramping up. I have a ton of content coming out. The ESPN Marathon is going to take place in August. Mostly check my socials at @LizLoza_FF on both X and Instagram. I post all of my work there, but I can tell you for fantasy football, I have been working on diligently. I'm almost done with it. It's a big article, so give yourself some time to digest it. I did a deep dive on all of these veteran running backs who are aged 26 to 30, 6 of them that switched teams, had been primary ball carriers for their teams and are now on new squads, and also dug into the stats about efficiency decline after age 26 in relation to each of them. It has been a heady project. I'm very proud of it. So I'd encourage everyone to check that out, and it should go live sometime next week. And you can find me at ESPN on TV, digital, and the .com.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Certainly one of the hardest working people in the fantasy industry, and it's on full display. So that does it for our Friday show. I'll be back with Kieran on Monday at 1 p.m. Central. Thanks so much for watching.